I hated my job, I hated what I was doing, I wasn't happy where I was in life, and yeah, I quit. Like, I mean, you know. Cool. So burnout, it's a thing. We're going to be talking about my experience with burnout, what happened to me, how I dealt with it, the process of burning out, some of the warning signs, and what kind of things you can do technically to help improve the developer experience. So hopefully this doesn't happen to anyone else out there. I'll put some timestamps over here, as well as a Medium article link down below that's a little bit more succinct than this 10-minute-ish long rambly video. The three parts we're going to be talking about are the kind of history, or like the process of burning out over the period of around 12 months, some of the technical and cultural implications that kind of led to that burnout, as well as how I kind of came through the other side, and what are some of the things you can do if you identify some of the issues happening here that could help either alleviate or kind of swerve away from burning out. Burning out is a process. It's not like a one-off incident. It is a kind of, at least for me, it was kind of like a long drawn out series of incidences that slowly kind of chipped away at my soul every day. This stuff can really creep up on you, and then all of a sudden you kind of realize how far down you are, and it can suck. So we're going to be talking about that. The process of burnout for me stemmed from a couple of different factors. First of which was environmental and cultural. It has to do with the people and the teams and the product that you're working with. That's super important. Trust among teammates is really important to like a high functioning team. So if that's not there, then there are issues. Finding value in the work that you do as well is super important for like a high performing individual. If you find value in the work that you do and you understand why you're doing certain things, I think that's a really big responsibility of a product owner to be able to communicate to the team the value in which they're going to be delivering. Also, the kind of technical aspects of what you're working on as well, what the state of the code bases that you're working on, can also have an impact on your kind of like mental health and the developer experience as a whole. All of those things kind of like factor together into at least my happiness while I was working. So for me, it started off with that kind of misalignment in values. I didn't really believe in the product that I was developing. I didn't really see the value in the work that I was delivering. And that for me is like a really foundational part of my work environment, my work ethic. If I understand the value that I'm bringing to the team and the value that I'm delivering to the product, that's super beneficial, because you come in motivated and pumped and you're like, yeah, let's get this feature out. And that for me just was not there. For me, that meant that I was doing something that I just didn't really care about. And that sucks. That has an impact on a lot of other areas of your life. So for me, because I was feeling so kind of like undervalued for the 8-hour workday, and I didn't really feel like I was being productive. Even though you may be getting stuff done, you may be getting your tickets done, if you don't understand why those tickets are being done, then you still kind of feel like you're not doing much. And so for me, it started off with, after I finished work, those hours between 5 and 12 o'clock at night, those became my productive hours. I felt like I needed to go and do something that would benefit my career, would benefit my technical skill set, would help me grow. And that started off healthy, because that was good. I always think it's good to kind of like have a bit of a side hustle. Relaxation and work-life balance, super important. But if you're doing outside of work that brings you joy and gets you going, super valuable. That became unhealthy when I just started pushing back my bedtime further and further and further and further, just because I wanted to get more stuff done. And obviously lack of sleep is not conducive to a healthy environment. So that again started to compound things a little bit. As the kind of year went on, that stress that I felt inside of work also started to kind of creep over to outside of work. And that's when things started to become a little bit rocky. I constantly felt like I was in like a flight or fight mode. That stress, I just felt stressed the entire week. I would finish work at 5:30, whatever it was, and then I'd be counting down the hours until I had to be back at work, and trying to really maximize the amount of time that I had outside of work. And so I'd finish work and I'd feel stressed because I needed to get stuff done. Friday nights were a bit of a breather for me, because I felt like I could actually truly relax, because I had 2 days to go and get stuff done. And Friday afternoon I could just be like, cool, I'm done. I can go home, I can watch Netflix, I can chill. When it got to the point that even those Friday evenings, I wasn't feeling relaxed. I was still feeling stressed, and I was like, okay, I only have 2 days now. That was a bit of a turning point, because I was like, okay, this is getting to be unhealthy. If I'm so unhappy with what I'm doing for 40 hours a week, I can't even feel relaxed on a Friday afternoon, Friday evening. That was a big like, uh-oh, things aren't going well. And all of this stuff together really had a number of different, it's like a collateral impact on the rest of your life. If your stress carries over from those working hours into other aspects of your life, it'll start impacting other aspects of your life. I stopped going to the gym and eating healthy because I felt like I had to go home and be productive and like get stuff done and develop and grow. And when I stopped going to the gym, it meant that I stopped eating well. I stopped sleeping well. I lost a lot of self-confidence while also putting on a lot of weight. At the time, I was trying to rationalize it by saying like, oh, no, you need to stick with this for a year, otherwise it won't look good on your CV. And in hindsight, I really wish I'd pulled the plug sooner, because that was not a healthy place for me to be in. I'm glad that it kind of taught me and showed me what things I do and don't like about a workplace, and that'll be something I'll carry with me for the rest of my career. But at the same time, it made me really dislike front end. And what I've been doing for the last 3 years, it really made me despise going into somebody else's code base and just being like, in terms of the impact it had on my mental health, my career, I was stagnant for that entire year. And I can't really get that back. All it will do now is kind of act as a springboard for me to really, get to grips with working on my own, being self-employed and freelancing and that kind of thing. So I'm grateful for that aspect of it, but going through that process of slowly hating what I did day after day after day for a year probably wasn't the best way to go about that particular learning. So yeah, that was basically the outcome of it. I hated my job, I hated what I was doing, I wasn't happy where I was in life, and yeah, I quit. If you're working on a team you don't like, on a product you don't like, it's a good sign that you should leave. I don't want to be the advocate for like, up and leave your job, because everyone's in a different financial situation. You might have dependents, you might have a mortgage, debt, whatever else. I was fortunately in a position that I could walk away. Not many other people can do that. So in terms of what this meant for me as a developer, well, I was in a position where I hated what I was doing. I hated going to work. I'd wake up every day and it would be such a struggle just to go into work. And then I would hate a large proportion of the time that I was there. I would look forward to 5 o'clock, and then as soon as it hit 5, I'd think, God, I have to be there in 16 hours time or 10 hours time. And I would be counting down the hours until I had to go back into work. It's just, when you get to the stage where you realize what you're doing and how your kind of thought processes are acting, you're like, why have I put up with this for so long? It's not good, really not good. Let's move on to the second portion of this, which is talking about the technical aspects as well as the cultural aspects, which I believe were contributing factors into why I burnt out. The first one being cultural. I think there's two basically different camps here. Is you have your product teams and you have your kind of agency or client work teams. And for me, I've realized I am not a client person. This is because when you get hired into a company, you go through a set of cultural interviews. You pass certain cultural tests. You make sure that you'll be a good fit for teams in terms of your development practices, your technical skill set, how you are as a person, what kind of values you believe in, whether or not you align with the company's values, and both parties can make an informed decision as to whether there's a good match. Unfortunately, when you get put into a client team, there is no match of values. Typically, if the client has money and they're willing to pay for the work, there you go. No cultural interview, nothing. So you end up working with a bunch of people who have not passed the same cultural fit tests that you have, who have a completely different way of working. And it's important to be flexible in this kind of area, but at the same time, if these values are so different from what you're hired to do and what you expected to be working in, there can be a serious discrepancy in the 40 hours plus you have to work every week if you're working with a completely different set of people that you envisioned you'd be hired to work with. That was a big thing for me, not working with the same people that I was hired to work with, basically. It's very difficult when there's big gaps in communication, pull requests, that kind of thing. I'm sure you've all been there. Yeah, it can be really challenging. Now, this is going to get a bit technical, so if you're not a React developer, I'm sorry. I'm going to try be as generic as possible so you can apply these concepts to the different facets. Although I'm pretty sure that a lot of these issues are front-end specific, so bear with me here. Inconsistency as a developer. Oh, this is a big one. Inconsistencies with code bases, naming, logic conventions. This is again a big difference between working with a product team versus working with like an agency or a client team. When you're with a product team, there's typically less turnover with the developers that come in and out of those teams. With a client team, if you've got, say for example, a long form project that runs over 2, 3, 4, 5 years, where you have one development team and its head developers cycle through. Some people might be there for 6 or 9 months, and then another person gets come in. And basically what happens is you get person A coming in and they think they know the best way to do things. Person B comes in, they think they know the best way to do things, so everything they build is different. Then you get person C coming in and they know that this way is the best thing to do things, so they start implementing things this way. And so you get a real mishmash of logic and naming conventions and patterns, and it just ends up being this little Frankenstein at the end of the day. And it's so frustrating to deal with. Holy crap, it's the worst. I was looking through one of the code bases and they had a component, 3 different components, all pretty much doing the same thing. One was called driver, drivers, driving. Those are prefixes for a whole bunch of different components. So there was no standardization. You could have driver license, driver's license, driving license. And it was this kind of inconsistency that made things really difficult to work with. Takeaway here, please keep things consistent. If you're coming onto a code base, sometimes consistency is far more important than doing things the right way. If things are consistent, at least they're terribly consistent. And if they're that bad that it needs a refactor, then go through and refactor, but make sure you have the time allocated to do that. You might get into a situation where you have a code base and you're like, yeah, let's go refactor this. And then you get a quarter of the way through the refactor and then you leave teams. Or you get halfway through and the PO is like, actually, you know what, we're gonna be doing this because this is higher priority now. And that's how you kind of end up with these Frankenstein front-end code bases, that the logic patterns are different, the way things are done are different, and it's just very difficult to work with. Issues number 2 and 3, rolling your own stuff. So libraries exist for a reason, and they are typically well tested. If you pick some of the big ones, they're well tested, they have good documentation, which is very important. And if you don't use these and decide to roll your own things, it is your responsibility to make sure they're readable, they work, they are tested, and the documentation is good if it's an internal thing. We had issues where sometimes people would develop their own things and they would implement it in repository A, then they'd bring it across to repository B because it was a very good idea. And then if that sounded snarky, it was, I'm sorry. Then they bring it to repository C and D. The problem is that if they take and copy paste it from A to B, they develop it, then B to C, develop it, C to D, develop it, you end up with like all these different copy pasted versions that aren't consistent with each other, but all kind of do the same thing. Very difficult to work with. And if this guy is the only person that knows how it works and it's like embedded throughout the entire application, you've just created a whole ton of legacy. And then maybe you leave the company and then, all 4 of these projects which use these utility functions that only you really know how to use, it's a bit problematic. There was one case, for instance, if any of you are familiar with Redux forms, where some people decided that it would be a good idea to, instead of using Redux forms and bringing in another library and God forbid bloating the Webpack bundle, they would roll their own form input. So they took one form input and then kind of Frankensteined it to do a whole ton of different stuff. Autofill capabilities, validation, verification, async calls to go and populate data, autofill, all this kind of stuff. The single responsibility principle does not exist in this world. And that's a huge issue because when you take something like this and you scale it to grow and you make it do all this kind of stuff and you use it throughout an entire application, like an onboarding process or something like that, The issue is that when you do this and you need to change something or it breaks everywhere. It makes it very difficult and not very modular because it does all these different things and you can't break it down into its specific bits because you change one thing here, but if it's used in 5 different other pages, that's a whole lot of testing to do. That makes the testers go crazy. That makes the developers go crazy because they're like, oh, I don't know, it might break everything. And so we ran into a lot of issues where we wanted one thing changed and it would just be a huge deal, huge monolithic deal. So something like that can really add to the stress as a developer as well. Keep that in mind before you go and enroll your own thing. See if there's a library out there that does it for you, that has its own documentation, that isn't maintained. Your Webpack bundle will be okay. So as to what happened at the end of all of this, how did I solve my burnout? I quit. There's only so much you can do, you know? If you're going through this kind of thing, know that you're not alone. This is something that software developers experience, not just software developers, obviously other areas, other careers, fields. Burnout is a real thing. Take care of yourselves, you know, exercise, eat right, be self-aware, kind of check in with yourself every once in a while. How am I feeling? Am I feeling stressed? What kind of areas are kind of impacting my life? It's a really hard thing to diagnose and it's a really hard thing to solve because it's a deeply personal issue. Everyone's going to have different circumstances and consequences for quitting their jobs, transitioning, moving. Everyone's got different support networks as well. So if you are in a position where you're feeling overworked and stressed and you've identified with some of the feelings that I revealed earlier on in the video, you know, be self-aware enough to ask for help. I think a lot more companies and cultures are becoming more aware that the mental health of their employees is an issue. It's something that they need to cater for to make sure that the people that they're employing are happy in the work that they're doing, that they're seeing value in the work that they're doing, that they're not hiring toxic employees who are damaging other people's mental health and bringing them down. You should be hiring team players who operate as a team, who can facilitate trust within people, you know? It's for me, I'm doing a lot better now. You know, I'm freelancing, I'm doing my YouTube thing, I'm learning motion design. It's all, you know, happy days from my end. But there was not a very nice period in my life. And I wouldn't wish other people to kind of go through what I had to go through, which is why I'm making this video. If you identify with the things here, please go and get help. Talk to your managers if you can. I would say talk to your friend group, your support group, your peer group first. See what they think, because they would have a much better idea of who you are as a person, your context, and what kind of things you're actually capable of changing as well. It could be something small, it could be something large. That entirely depends on you. I don't want to lead you down, you know, like a specific track. This is just what worked for me because I have no dependents. I was able to move back in with my parents, and you know, it's a bit of a journey. You know, so I've included some links down in the description below, which may help. It's a little bit more of the kind of process of burnout and things you can kind of do to mitigate it or help solve things a little bit. If you've experienced burnout as a developer, if you've experienced burnout at all, maybe leave a comment down below and share those feelings, and maybe other people will come through, see this video, and they'll look down and they'll be like, okay, so this is, other people have gone through this, and you can maybe have a discussion around how you guys solve these particular issues. Being open about these things and not suffering in silence, I think will only be beneficial to the community. So yeah, that's my story. That's kind of what I did, and I hope that you gained some value out of this. Yeah, not an easy thing to talk about. Again, deeply personal stuff, but I felt like it was worth sharing the story with you guys, and yeah. Hope you got some value out of it. Yeah, as per the usual YouTube thing, like if you liked it, dislike if you know, you disliked it, subscribe if you want to see more content. Not maybe like this. This is going to be the most negative video I'm going to be making. I'm going to be doing stuff around photography tutorials, some web development stuff with Webflow, motion design, Cinema 4D. You may have seen the intro at the beginning. Cinema 4D, pretty cool stuff. And yeah, that'll be it from me. Thank you very much, everyone. Appreciate your time. See you in the next one.